Today's broadcast.
Hanging on. I just want to start tonight by talking about how God moves for us to be here on this day. There are three things that stand out to us when we're thinking about being here on February 27th. And the first is that February has always been historically the roughest month in our relationship. We have said how hard February is on our relationship because it's the end of basketball season. It's the biggest unknown of basketball season because the regular season ends and then there's possibly conference tournaments and possibly state tournaments. I'm tired. She's tired of me being gone, not being home. And in the first, we'll be married 8 years in April. And in the first few years, February has just been bad. We've had a lot of rough patches in February. So, but what's interesting is that Relationship Bootcamp was moved to February from January. And I know the logistical reasons that pastors did that, but it was moved to February this year. Since we've been coming here, it'll be 3 years in April as well. April will be our 3rd year anniversary at Heirs. February 17th was a little bit better. February of 2018 was even better. And although we've had a lot going on in 2019 of this month, it's been even better. And it all goes back to our relationship with God. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, Pastor asked us, I can't remember if it was December or very early in January, about doing a session for Relationship Bootcamp. And he asked for some dates. So between my schedule and Ryder's schedule and when we were going to go see Ryder, I sent him a text message early on in January. And I didn't hear back. And I was like, well, Pastor's busy, but I sent him the dates. So he's got it taken care of. Well, a couple weeks later in January, he calls me and says, hey, I just want to lock up a date for Relationship Bootcamp. And he said, how does February 27th work for you? And I was like, absolutely, because I only gave him 2 dates in February that we were able to do something because of everything we had going on. And I said, yeah, that's one of the dates I gave you. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, when I sent you the text message. He said, I never got the text message. So he had not known that this was one of 2 dates that we could possibly do this. And it was one of the dates that he needed us to do it. So I look at that, and that's powerful for him to just ask like that. He could have asked for any other date in February, and it probably would not have worked out, but he asked for February 27th. So God moving in that way. And then today is also my parents, what would have been their 56th anniversary. My father passed away last year, so this is the first year that they won't celebrate it together in the world, but as far as it would have been their anniversary. So I just think about the impact that relationship had on me, and all those things coming together, and it's just amazing to see how God moves. If you don't have, I didn't always have a relationship with God. I thought I did. I thought I had my own relationship with God. But until coming to Heirs and finding out what a true connection to God was, being involved in the Word, being involved, knowing what God was saying to me, and to hear people say, well, have you heard from God? And like, okay, well, I would probably just make something up because I'd never heard from God. But over these past, now going on 3 years, to know that God moved and to be able to look back on all the things that happened in our life is just absolutely amazing when you have that relationship with God. So when we sat down to talk about what we were going to say, first thing that came to her was to talk about a blended family, because we have a blended family. And the first thing in my mind was communication. And then when we were kind of talking this out, she said something that I thought was very powerful. So I'll let you kind of take it from there.
What I had said was,
as far as relationships, a lot of times people have questions, maybe not just in romantic relationships, but certainly in those relationships. Is this the person that I'm meant for? Is this the person that God meant for me? And we always question, okay, was this God ordained? I think a lot of times we have those types of questions. And what I said was, you can know that it's from God if the relationship brings you closer to God. And that's in any type of relationship. It can be a friendship, it can be family relationships, it can be romantic relationships. But I think that when God puts someone in your life, and if it's ordained by Him, and this is what is meant to be, those relationships will make you closer to God, and that's what kind of started the whole thing off.
Absolutely, because when you think about any type of relationship, if it's not bringing you closer to God, then what are you doing with it? And it's a two-way street. How are you impacting those people, and how are they impacting you? And if you can look at a relationship and say that God's not a part of it, then you need to rethink that relationship, because God has to be the center of it all, okay, for all of us. So then this is going to be part of a testimony about our relationship. But we sat down and said, what makes us work as far as our relationship? But these things also apply to any relationship. It's not just a romantic relationship, but what makes us work. Some of these things you have heard before, but we felt that that's where we needed to start. So do you want to start off?
I can. One of the most important things that made us work was that we were friends first. We truly were friends before anything romantic became part of who we are. And that is very important, because we know that in John it says that a friend will lay down his life for someone else. And for me, that was incredibly important, because when we got together and we were friends, I was in no way looking for a romantic relationship, and I made that extremely clear to him. My kids liked him before I did, which also was a very good telling sign. But with me, because I had two children, we were a package. And in being that, not only did he have to lay down his life for me, but he had to lay down his life for my children as well. And what I've always told my boys is that the relationship that's going to work best for you is somebody who you have a friendship with first. Because when the bad days come, and they're going to, when that person doesn't look as beautiful as they normally do, and when they have an attitude, and when they're crazy and they're funky, you're going to have to still like them as a person. And if that's not there, the relationship won't last. Do you want to elaborate on some of the things that you had said?
Well, I just, the first thing is, and I wasn't always like this, but I guess in 1999, I watched my dad had a stroke, and I watched my mother be there for him. And he was 58 at the time, but it started to go through my head that it's got to be more than just the physical. And we spend so much of our time just thinking about physical attraction, things that are physical. But just like receiving salvation, receiving the Holy Spirit, God is beyond the physical. If all we have is a physical, that is only temporary. And for me to be able, I had to put that aside, because for a relationship, and we've both been married and divorced. This is our second marriage, and I wish I knew God so much sooner, because, and I'm blessed that He brought me Misty and Donner and Ryder, but I was wrapped up in the physical, and it's got to be, a relationship has to be so much more than the physical. There's got to be a deeper connection. And she was in Memphis. I was in Charlotte when I started going out there. She asked me to come out once, and I just kept coming back. And we're talking about every other weekend. It's a long drive to Memphis. And it was during basketball season. And we'd have a game, and about 10 o'clock at night, I'd wrap it up and head down to Atlanta, and then up to Chattanooga, and then through Nashville, and finally get to Memphis. I stayed in a hotel because she had 2 boys. And that was the right thing to do. But I knew with her, like, as soon as I walked into her house, God was everywhere. She wasn't going to church, but God was everywhere. I could feel the presence of God on her. In one of our first trips, she was showing me the town that she lived in, and she said, this is the church that I would be going to, but she worked on Sundays. And then one of our first deep conversations, I remember telling her that you could bring me closer to God. And I had no idea what that was going to mean back in 2009 going into 2010. I had no idea that I would be here right now and my life would change. But she taught me so many things by having that friendship, because it wasn't going to be physical. You know, Pastor talks about premarital counseling and abstinence and the things that go along with that, and to truly appreciate who you are going to be with, because that's a small part of it when you think about the physical intimacy that goes on in a relationship. You've got to deal with each other on a daily basis. So for me, going out there and, you know, having that separation, you know, I had to, and Donner can answer a lot of questions and tell you what he felt from his perspective, because he was 15 at the time. But, you know, I had to have boundaries. I had to stay in my lane, okay? Not as a man who was falling in love with a woman, but as a man who was falling in love with, okay, 3 people, and the dog probably as well. So, you know, being friends is just so valuable, and what a friend means. And I feel for you guys, Chris and Harold. I feel because what friendship means with social media, I don't know, and maybe I'm just old, but I don't know if I see the younger generation every day. I work with them every single day. And what a friend truly means, and struggling with friendships, and getting a like, or being with somebody on Snapchat, or I saw their story, or watched this funny video, and, you know, the amount of relationships that I see that are built where they've never had personal contact with them. I'm not saying that can never happen, but they've never had that personal contact, because on here you get on. I'm showing my phone, but on your phone you get to be any way that you want. And you can create any image that you want, and people are drawn to the physical image that you put out there. And there are just so many things. So I feel for your generation, just because that word friendship really means a whole lot to me as far as what a friend will do. And I think about, this is very powerful in John 15:15. Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth, but I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard of my Father, I have made known unto you. And you talk about the deepest relationship that we should have, the first relationship that we have. For God to call us a friend, like, he calls me friend. I'm not going to sing because I can't. But when I think about that song, he calls me friend, and it's just powerful. It's just very, very powerful to me to know that I'm not alone, no matter what I'm going through. I've always got, if he's going to ask me to do that, and then he's going to friend me, that is one of the most powerful things. And she taught me that, because she taught me, she laid down a lot of things. She said, you're going to have to be the head of the household, you know, and what that means is what comes out of the Bible. When she was telling me I needed to be the head of the household, she went right to the Bible and told me that. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. We're going to be this partnership. And she's like, no, this is what your role is based upon the Bible, and this is what my role is based upon the Bible. And it's all right here. And it's all very accurate. And it's all things that, you get caught up in the world and what the world says, but when you look at what a relationship is based upon what God is telling you to do, it's very powerful.
Did you want to move on to communication?
However you want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So friendship, finding out what a friend is, what a friend means, and knowing that it's a lot more than the physical, and knowing that it starts with God. So the second thing we were talking about was communication. And it's said all the time in this church, but speaking the truth in love. You talk about the honeymoon period in any type of relationship. It doesn't matter if you once again, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, but if you talk about a relationship, you have to be able to communicate, and it's always got to be honest communication. You have to speak the truth in love. And when I met her, she didn't put on any airs. She didn't try to be anybody. She is the exact same person, as far as she laid it all out there. She told me we were never going to get married. She told me it was never going to happen. She told me she was very blunt about how this was not going to happen. And back in 2010, I said, well, okay, 5 years, I'm going to give you 5 years. That's how I approached it. I said, I'll give you 5 years. You do whatever you got to do, but for me, I'm going to, in 5 years, that's the time frame I put on it. And I was blessed that it happened a lot sooner, but God moved for her, and I thank you for that, God. But as far as, she always told me exactly what it was. And when her mindset changed, she was very, very honest about it. She was very honest about talking with Donner and Ryder. I grew up, my dad didn't communicate like that. It's like he would tell me something, or my mom would tell him to tell me something, and that was that. And Misty will tell me all the time, well, you need to talk with the boys. Still to this day. And I'll do my best, because that's something that I'm still growing with, because they were 15 and 12 when I came into their life, and here I was 38 years old, and I had never had to talk. I mean, I talk to kids every day, but they're not mine. And she was trying to tell me, whether I needed to fix something with them, or whether I needed to, if I got mad at them, she's like, well, you need to go back and you need to fix it. And you need to tell them why you were mad. And I was like, no, I was just mad, and they should understand that they shouldn't do that again. And she would say, no, you need to talk. You need to communicate with them. Now, once again, you can get Donner's perspective on stuff, but he may not agree with that. But it was a challenge for me, and it's something that I'm still growing in, because as I'm growing and learning how to talk to my sons and have a relationship, and they're getting older too, and they're dealing with different things. So as I'm growing, I'm still thinking of them as 15 and 12, but, they're 24 and 21. And they're dealing with very different things. And now I've got to handle it in a whole different way. And it's a challenge, but the communication has to be there. And hopefully she has made me a better person, because she has forced me to communicate. And it was very uncomfortable. And Pastor talks about being uncomfortable, but that communication has to go in every single relationship. And that communication, I see it with God as well. Speaking in tongues. Stella is the first person I've heard live speak in tongues. It was in this church. Stella was the first person. Came to church, and I saw Stella, and I said, I couldn't wrap my brain around it. And then all of a sudden, I'll never forget, Minister Sammy came up to me and said, you're going to have to do that. And I was like, I don't know how. And he said, well, you're going to have to practice. And he said, you're going to have to hear from God. And, it's amazing how, when I speak in tongues now, it was uncomfortable 3 years ago. And I'm still growing in it. But it's amazing when God touches you that way. It's just absolutely powerful that God can communicate with you. And I was always of the belief that it was just show. I was always of the belief that you couldn't have, it's just something that you have in the moment, that it was not really God. But when you live it, it's once again, with my relationship with God has showed me that this is real. The speaking in tongues, how God communicates with me, but I have to communicate back. And in our relationship, we have to communicate with God. And one of the things that we do is we communicate with each other about God, but also to God. Whether it's praying or whether it's talking things out and trying to figure them out. Our go-to used to be to go to the Mexican restaurant, have margaritas, sit there all day, because alcohol had to be involved. We can't figure out a solution without alcohol. We've got a problem. Ryder needed to change schools. Well, we're going to go to the Mexican restaurant and we're going to have margaritas, and that's going to solve everything. It didn't solve anything. It didn't solve anything. And if anything, physically, it made us feel worse. So now that we can sit anywhere, and alcohol not involved, we can sit there and we can say, hey, you know what? Because God comes in. And there's no regrets. There's no hangovers. There's no, I lost all that time. There's no blind spots because it was the margarita talking, as opposed to God and asking God and trying to hear from God. And that was the first several years of our relationship. Everything, bad day, alcohol. Come home, have a shot. It's the only way I can get through, because life is throwing so many things at you. And that was our substance of choice. And it's just what we did. It was there all the time. But that communication, that delayed a lot of communication that we need to have with God.
The Lord is my life and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I be afraid? The Lord is my light and salvation. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I be afraid? The Lord is my light and my salvation. will see the goodness of the Lord. Hallelujah. Change me, oh God. Make me more like you. Change me, oh God. Wash me through and through. Create in me a clean heart, so that I may worship you. Change me, oh God. Make me more like you. Change me, oh God. Wash me through and through. Create in me a clean, clean heart, so that I may worship you. I need you to change me. I need you to change me, Lord. Change me from the inside out. Change me, Lord. Change me like only you can do, Lord. Change me. Renew a right spirit in me, God. Change me. I need you to change me, oh God. Change my attitude, Lord, right now, right now, right now. Change me to be more like you, Lord. Change me like you are, Lord. Change me, make me more like you, God, like you, God. Change me from the inside out, Lord. Wash me clean, Lord. Change me, wash me clean, Lord. Wash me clean, Lord. Change me. I need you to change me. Change. Hallelujah. I need you to change me right now. I need more of your love right now, Lord. I need more of your mercy, your grace extended to others, Lord. Help me to love like you love, Lord. Help me to see like you see, Lord. Help me to see like you, Lord. Help me to hear like you, Lord. I need you to change me, Lord, like only you can do, Lord. A wonderful change has come over me. Wonderful change. Wonderful change has come over. Yes, Lord. Create in me a clean heart, Lord. A wonderful change. Renew a right spirit in me, God.
And that was our substance of choice. And it's just what we did. It was there all the time. But that communication, that delayed a lot of communication that we need to have with God for ourselves. I'll let you.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly point out something. When he and I put this together, we were looking through some of the verses, and I'll let you talk about Ephesians, but I wanted to mention James 1:19. And another way that God moved was, if you were on the prayer line this morning, you heard that was the word for today. And I heard that this morning, and I had to text Zip. I'm like, was that James 1:19? And she said, yeah. And I said, yeah, okay. So in my head, I'm thinking, I see you, God, because that verse says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And that is so important in all of our relationships, because I think a lot of times when we think about communication, we're thinking about speaking, and a lot of times we really need to be thinking about listening. I've learned that. I'm still learning that. I'm getting much better at being slow to speak and slow to anger than I used to be. But that's a very powerful verse, and it was just, again, another reason that God's just moving right now with that being the word this morning, and then also we had planned to talk about that today. But it's true, we spend so much of our time recovering from miscommunication, from misunderstandings. We waste a lot of time and energy being upset about things that really probably weren't meant to be harmful or hurtful, but we're not listening and we're not paying attention, and we don't have the right open heart or mind to try and overcome some of the difficult conversations that we may need to have. So that was just really powerful. And then I was going to let you speak about Ephesians.
Well, I kind of already did about speaking
Okay.
the truth in love.
Oh, gotcha.
But it's so simple, James 1:19, but it's so hard. I mean, quick to listen. We shut people down in our minds all the time. We based upon body language, based upon what they show to us, based upon how we feel. Like, oh, this is going to be difficult. There'd be times, with Donner, he would say something, and I'd probably shut him down because maybe I wasn't prepared to have the conversation. Maybe I didn't know what I was talking about. Maybe I was just going based upon tradition, and that's all I wanted to live with was, okay, well, this is the way it's got to be. But as far as being quick to listen, everybody needs to be listened to. Whether we think they do or not, it's not up to us. If we are put there, if God has placed us into a situation, we need to listen to that situation. And then slow to speak, because that's the part that slows us down, is we're always falling back on the fact that, well, I've got to have a rebuttal. And she's as good a lawyer as anybody in an argument. So as far as she doesn't forget things, she remembers word for word. I would not stand a chance in a courtroom against her. But God has moved so far in her. Everybody's got a story, and she also has a story. And the person I met that had a lot of anger, had a lot of frustration, had a lot of things that I would say something, and that would be a trigger for her. It would set her off. And I didn't know it, but she went right back into being defensive in those situations. And now when things come up, I was far from good either, because I would get right at it with her. But now it's like, if we're feeling something getting elevated in our relationship, it calms down. It's amazing how quick it calms down. And there's no other reason other than God. It's changed since we have started coming to this church. It's changed since we have been introduced to what studying the Word really means, meditating on the Word really means, having that to fall back to. It's those types of things that now the communication happens because we're not going our separate ways. The communication happens because it's not, well, she's mad and I'm mad, and now who's going to be the first to break the silence? Doesn't it always come down to that? Well, I'm mad at you, and well, I'm going to be mad because you're mad at me, and now we're not going to talk about it. But that doesn't get you anywhere. That just slows down the communication. And then, you've got to get to that point where you can communicate with your partner to say, hey, you know what? I love you so much, and I care about you so much. And, is that the way God wants me to handle this? Because if that's not the way God wants me to handle it, then what are we doing? Letting the devil win. And that's really what you're doing, is allowing the adversary into the relationship. And it's hard. It's hard when you have, so much history that she has, and then I bring my history and baggage into it. And instead of just building on what we've had since 2010, we bring in what's been going on since the 1970s and 80s and early 90s. And it's unfair to bring those things into our relationship because we didn't know how to handle them. People talk about, opposites attract. And I think there may be something to that, the science or of whatever that, I'm not really sure. But people talk about having differences and what those, we're different. And that's okay. It's okay to have differences. It's okay to have your things. But if those differences start separating your relationship, and this is just my opinion, I don't have any foundation for this, I don't have any research for this, but if those differences start affecting us and start separating us, then I think in a relationship, you need to reassess what those differences are. And you got to go back to communicating them. So my first marriage, I love sports, but it has a different priority in my life than it used to. But when my first marriage, she was a sports fan and I was a sports fan. And then after we were married, it was like, you're watching the game again? It was like, she told me, well, if you can coach basketball, but if I have a problem with it, you need to stop, even if it's right in the middle of the season. And then she would go watch her shows, and then I'd watch basketball all night long, and we kept separating. And there's nothing wrong with, hey, I want to watch the game, you want to watch something else, but it has to be, you have to agree upon that stuff. It can't just be, well, this is what I do. God rest his soul, my dad went out every Thursday night. Every Thursday night, he went out with his friends. They drank till about 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning. Never saw my dad have a hangover. It was the devil attacked him that way because without having a hangover, he could drink as much as he wanted, get up and go to work the next day. But if that separated him from my mother, then he shouldn't be doing that. Does that make, am I making sense? I'm just trying to, if we're doing things, Pastor wants to ride the roller coaster, and Pastor Melanie is fine with it, even though she doesn't want to get on the roller coaster, that's not separating the relationship. Now, if he's saying, hey, you know what, I'm going on the roller coaster, and I don't care what you do, and I don't care that you don't care, and if she was like, I don't want you to do that, then they've got to figure out that agreement amongst themselves and move in that direction. But I think too many times it's like, well, this is who I was. This is who I am. I told you who I was. Yeah, but you were in the honeymoon period in whatever relationship you were building, and you weren't completely honest because you didn't speak the truth in love. And she always spoke the truth in love, so I always knew what I could expect. And I always knew that, whatever the differences, we disagreed on a lot of things about the boys. But we had to come to an agreement. Maybe it was her way, Maybe it was her idea. It's like, okay, I disagree with that, but in our covenant, we have to agree that that's the decision that we're going to make together, and we're going to stand united in that. As opposed to, well, you know what? Fine, you tell Donna to do it that way, and then when it falls apart, I'll just tell you I told you so. You can't get to that point. You can't wait for them to, okay, well, that was your idea. No, when we have a disagreement, we have to talk it out, and then we agree to move on from there. We take the next best step from there, but we can't go back. We can't let that communication take us all the way back to where, hey, you know what, that issue becomes stronger than the covenant. And if it becomes stronger than the covenant, then the covenant's going to fall apart. All right, the next thing, so friendship, communication, and Minister Lamar and Mr. Samuel, you'll have to, I don't know if this is fact or not, but you can help me out later on, Mr. Jackie, as far as trust was one of the words that came to me, like what trust is. But then as I was researching it, I saw things that said, the Bible says we should trust no man other than unless it's in marriage. So you should trust your spouse, but you should trust no other man because you should be trusting God. So I don't know if they want to comment on that. So I changed the word from trust to confidence. So because I didn't know if I was violating anything by saying trust. So because if that's the case, I don't want that to be the word I chose. But confidence, I have to have confidence in her. It is great. It is great to not have to be jealous or envious because I'm confident that she's not going to do anything to harm our covenant. Doesn't matter what's going on, doesn't matter who's talking to her, doesn't matter how bad things get. I work with every teacher, every custodian, every person in my building is a female. And she has to be confident at the same time that if something doesn't go right in the morning, I can't go and start talking to everybody at work about, well, this is the way my wife was this morning. That's not fair to her. And that's not right. And I can't think that she gets all of me. They get one part of me about going to work. And when you're in those temporary relationships, everybody gets to tell you the things that you want to hear. Everybody's going to, who are you listening to? Who are you trying to get the attention of? And it has to be one of those things that I have to be confident in her. She has to be confident in me. That no matter what they say to me, I'm gonna have a boundary. I'm gonna make sure that nobody thinks anything different than what my intention is. There'll be times that something will happen with kids at school, and they'll be like, "Well, can you come discipline my kids?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not gonna come discipline your kids. Like, this is a school situation. But I can't take that as building me up, if that makes any sense. I think of a time when I was telling her about, they're like, "Are you this good at home?" And I'm thinking, well, you have to ask my wife because she'll tell you the actual truth. You see one glimpse of me. You see me during the day, and you see me, and you don't get to see all of me. You only see parts of me. So you'd have to ask my wife. But I think as guys, sometimes we get that attention. And when things are bad in a relationship and you aren't confident in a relationship, you can drift away. And I could say that easily in my previous marriage. I could say that, if there was a bad situation, I would talk about it, and then you get the ear of another female, and it's like, oh, wow. And then all of a sudden you're in a weird situation because then they start talking about their bad relationship. And it's like, I can't do that. I can't put myself in that situation because that compromises who we are and what our covenant is. So having those boundaries, but having that confidence. I don't know what you want to add to it.
As far as the confidence, when I was in my first marriage, there was a time where I had to make a hard decision for the safety and well-being of myself and my kids. And when I did that, when I said, okay, you're either going to have to go into treatment and get clean, or you're going to have to leave, and he chose to leave. I lost confidence, I think, in general mankind at that point, because I had this horrible feeling that when that happened, that my children were no longer going to have really the only father figure that they'd ever known. Now, not that this guy was, the most horrible person on the planet. He wasn't. He was just a drug addict, and he made some really bad decisions, and we all do it. But he wasn't the greatest role model either. And for that, first I felt guilt for putting my kids in a situation like that. But my confidence was shaken because I knew at that point that person was no longer going to be in my children's life. And while right now I'm incredibly grateful and thankful because God had a plan. God gave them exactly what they needed in this man right here. Because I know, and I knew when I decided to take the step with him to move forward in a relationship, I never had a doubt about him. I never, if something had happened to me at any point, I knew, and I still know to this day, that even though those boys are grown, if anything ever happens to me, he's still going to be their dad. He's still going to be there for them. He's not going to leave them to flounder on their own and figure it out. And that's the kind of confidence that I have in him. And that's the kind of confidence that we want to look for, because that's also the same type of confidence that we should have in God. What God says is true. What God says is the end. He is the final authority. He is the author and finisher of our faith. Everything that God says is true, and it will come to pass. And that's the kind of confidence that I'm so very thankful for in my relationship with God, but I'm also thankful that God has shown me that I can have not exactly the same type of confidence, because we're talking about a godly relationship, but a confidence in a godly person that we can believe in and we can have confidence in, that they will do the right things if they're in the relationship with God as well. So, and that was incredibly important to me. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
The last thing I have is humility. And that's another thing that's allowed our relationship to grow, is it's not about always being right. Whereas I think when we first met, we both had to be right. And as soon as we both had to be right, that led to a lot of arguments and disagreements. But having the humility, in any relationship, to be able to step back and say, you know what, it's not about getting the credit. It's not about being right. If you speak the truth in love, you can leave it at that. But like Pastor says, if you feel you got played, then some people act a certain way. But if you just step back and say, okay, well, you know what? It's God's going to take care of what he needs to take care of with you. But if I act a certain way and start acting like that person, then, I've left God. And having the humility to be able to, just put yourself out there from the beginning, be who you always are, be true to yourself. But to be able to say, you know what, is this worth, an argument? Is it truly worth an argument? Do I have to be right?
Humility was hard for me at first, just because of some of the situations that I had been in. And so I always had to be right. I always had to have the last word. It all had to end right there with me. And that was something that we've had to work through, because I've had to learn that it's okay to not always be right. It's okay to fail. It's okay to mess up. It's you don't have to be Superman or Superwoman all the time. It's okay to say that you need help. It's okay to say that you need whatever it is that you need from that person. It's okay to let them know that. So yeah, for the humility part of it, definitely has come a long way, I would say.
I think it's just the transparency of a relationship. I think she had to tell me a lot of her truth, and it was hard for her to tell me the things that she needed to place so that our relationship could start and then go from there. And for me, having the humility to tell her my truth and a lot of things that I've done and a lot of things that I've gone through that I'm not proud of. But to be able to place myself out there to know that this is who I am, and it took some time early on. But now, she told me very early on, she said, I can deal with the worst truth. I can't deal with a lie. And that hit me really hard. It was like, we can get through anything, but you better tell me the truth. And you better tell me the truth up front. And then we go from there. But if you lie to me, based upon her history, it was going to be over at that point in time. Because you just start chasing the lies, and then that breaks all the confidence after that. But humility in any relationship, so many people want to stand their ground. And, I see it all the time as far as people that, hey, you want to be right? Go ahead. You can be right all day long. If that's going to make this conversation come to a conclusion, because if you have to be right, I'll figure that out soon enough, and then I'll let you be right. Okay? I'll let you know what I thought about the situation, but I'm not going to throw it down your throat. I'm not going to sit there and say, hey, you know what? We're going to sit and argue, and I'm going to get elevated because I know I'm right, and I have to prove that to you. It will come out in time. I said what I needed to say, but humility is a tough one, because we want to be recognized so many times, and in relationships it's just difficult when you don't operate in humility.
Yeah.
So that's what we feel makes us work, our friendship, having communication, trust or confidence, and then humility, and just it all has to come back to God. Every single thing we do has to get back to God. And even though we are in different places than when we started our relationship, I still think she's light years ahead of me when it comes to knowing God. I still think that, at some point I stopped trying to play catch up and just do what I needed to do, but because she was already moving in a direction, but we're able to grow together and we're able to learn together, and that's that humility of knowing, hey, you know what, I don't have to be superior to her in that avenue, because I'm just a babe in Christ, and I'm still learning. Because for me, I'm about to be 3 years into it. I feel like she's been into it for a lot longer, and she's helped me there. But just because we weren't there together didn't mean that God didn't have a plan, that he wasn't going to bring us along. So.
No, because it definitely was a part of his plan, and the growth that we've experienced together as a couple in our family, the things that we've seen happen, for each other, as a couple, with our children, the things that have gone on with them, it's nothing but God, and there's just nothing else to say except it was all God's work.
Thanks for tuning in to today's broadcast. To view videos or make donations, feel free to access our website at www.heirscc.org. Remember, at Heirs, we believe we're just what you prayed for.